Back in 2018, I accidentally ran 100 miles in 24 hours and earned myself this beautiful belt buckle. And I say accidentally because I didn't train for it, I didn't plan for it, certainly didn't expect it, but it did happen. In this video, I'm going to talk about everything I did leading up to the race, everything that happened during the race, and the lessons that I took away that hopefully will help you someday run 100 miles. Let's rewind back to December of 2015. Me and my family made the decision to move from Michigan down to North Carolina. We had just had enough of the Michigan winters. We had lived there our entire lives and we were ready for a new adventure. One thing about that though is we didn't know anybody down in North Carolina. I realized I needed to make some friends, and the best way that I could figure out to do that was to join a run club. So I joined Holly Springs Run Club. I quickly went from running 3 miles 2 or 3 times a week to running 5 miles every day, and it wasn't long before I was racing half marathons and just completely losing my mind for running. After the move, I started working full-time from home, and running became my outlet for stress relief and to get out of the house and actually interact with other adults. 2017 was my year of the marathon. I had ran one back in 2013 but hadn't ran a race since then. In my third run with the run club, I signed up for the Blue Ridge Marathon. No big deal, it's just billed as America's toughest road marathon. That year I'd also run the Myrtle Beach Marathon, the Rock and Roll Raleigh Marathon, the Barkley Fall Classic, and the Kiowa Marathon. I decided 2018 was going to be my year of the ultra. I already had a little taste of that from running the Barkley Fall Classic, but that was a failure. I decided to up the ante and signed up for the Blue Ridge Double Marathon, and as part of my training I also ran the UARI 40 miler back in February. I maintained decent mileage, about 30 to 40 miles per week throughout the summer, just chasing the goal of running 2,018 miles in the year 2018. I ended up running the Barkley Fall Classic again, but that was another failure, but was a great experience and had a great time on feet training. This time I was able to share that race with my friend Mark from the Run Club, and even though we didn't have great results in the race, it was still an awesome weekend. All the way back in May, Mark suggested that I join him for this 24-hour race that he had signed up. I was very tempted, as I always am when it comes to racing, but I knew it was probably a bad idea to sign up for something like that, as I was already signed up for the Marine Corps Marathon just 6 days before. His argument was that it's not a measured distance race, it's just running 0.6 mile loops around a park, and you can sit down and stop whenever you want, you can take breaks, you have all the aid available to you every 6 to 10 minutes, however long it takes to run the loop. You know, just go out and have fun with it, and whatever happens, happens. Finally in October, I caved and decided to register. I wasn't going to set any goals, I was just going to take what the day gave me and have fun with it, and whatever happened, happened. But in the back of my mind, I secretly had a little thought about maybe going for 100 miles. I wanted to keep that 100-mile goal a secret, but as past history has indicated, I'm terrible about keeping secrets. My wife and I had talked about keeping it a secret when we had kids, about if it was a boy or girl, and that usually lasted all about 8 minutes. So in the couple weeks before the race, I put a post out on Facebook telling everybody, hey, I'm doing this race and I'm going for 100 miles. But I can't do it without your support. So our awesome friend Julie said that she would be out there for the entire race doing whatever she could do to help. And a couple other friends from the Run Club said they would come out during the night hours and run some laps with us just to keep us awake and entertained and keep us moving. I put another huge goal out there for me that I've always wanted to run a sub 4-hour marathon, and I've been pretty close a couple times, so I was going to try it again at the Marine Corps Marathon. My friend Dave paced me for about 15 miles until everything fell apart, and so I think I ended up coming in close to 4.5 hours, so way over my goal. Really kind of made me question what I was doing as a runner, or if I had any idea how to set realistic expectations. I did wonder though if my training had been more appropriate for ultras as opposed to trying to set a marathon PR. I've been doing a lot of low heart rate training and also a lot of just time on feet training with walking and other things. But I did end up backpedaling a little bit on that 100-mile goal and decided I just wanted to set a distance PR, which my previous longest distance race was 52.4 miles. That was the Blue Ridge Double Marathon. I wanted to do that, and I wanted to be able to still be moving by 7 a.m. on Sunday morning. I just wanted to move for the entire 24 hours, whatever that ended up getting me. I did as much research as I possibly could about how to survive your first 24-hour, 100-mile race. Every article and race report gave little tidbits of information that I would take and use in my race. I packed shirts, shorts, pants, jackets, headwear, multiple pairs of socks and shoes for every scenario, different food, different drinks, everything you could imagine that I could possibly need. I obsessed about an Excel spreadsheet with formulas for different run-walk ratios, and also included backup plans for decreased running and increased walking for when everything went to hell. On several runs around our 0.3 mile neighborhood loop, I practiced what I called my ultra shuffle. I would run a couple laps and then walk a lap to try to simulate what I was going to do at the race. I was armed to the teeth with knowledge and gear, ready to do battle. Just had to remember to pack the determination, mental focus, and grit. So now it's time for race day. After loading up all my gear the night before, I woke up. I made the short 20-minute drive from my house over to the race start to meet up with Mark, Brandon, and Julie. They had camped there overnight and apparently had not slept very well. It was cold and rainy, and apparently there were some people out there like drag racing up and down the street all night. So that was kind of annoying, but sometimes that's things you deal with when you camp out at a race. I set up my camp chair, unloaded the car, went over and got my bib from the packet pickup, and I chatted with a bunch of the other runners. Mark and I discussed that we kind of had our own strategies to do whatever, and we didn't necessarily plan on sticking together for the whole race, but it's such a short loop, we knew that we would eventually link back up and hang out for a while here and there. So let's get into some numbers, because I'm a big nerd and that's my kind of thing. The Backyard Ultra format was kind of starting at this time, and so I knew to run 100 miles in 24 hours, you have to do 1.667 miles per hour. That equated to 7 laps on our course, which was 0.59 miles. Yeah, that equals 4.14 miles, so we needed to do just a little bit more than 7 miles, or a little bit more than 7 laps per hour. So my plan was to run 1 lap between a 10-minute and 11-minute per mile pace, and then I'd walk half a lap, around 16 or 17-minute pace. With that math and distances, I figured that would get me about 8 laps per hour, and I wanted to do that for the first 6 hours to try to, kind of build up that little bit of a cushion, because I knew as the race went on throughout the night, I'd get tired and I'd slow down, so I wanted to have a few extra laps in the bag towards getting that goal. I was going to use the walking breaks that coincided with going past the aid station as a cue to grab either something to eat or something to drink, and I would always take that with me and always keep moving while I'm eating or drinking. Didn't want to waste any time sitting around eating, even just if it was 30 seconds, because as you do that, multiple times every hour, every couple laps, that 30 seconds adds up to minutes and potentially even an hour of wasted time. And I just did not want to have that. So every time I grabbed some food, I took it and immediately walked out and just kept moving. I also did some math during the race, which Mark wasn't sure he trusted math while running because of some past experiences with me trying to do some math and just being completely off, either with distance or how much time or pace that we had to do. But I was certain 24 hours is 1,440 minutes, and you divide that by 100 miles, gives you 14.4 minutes per mile, which is 14.24 seconds. So that was the average pace we needed to maintain. And so we were going to kind of just keep that in the back of our heads throughout the day and see where we lined up with that. One nice thing we had with the live tracking was that it not only showed our lap time and our distance, it did show that average pace. So we were able to see that every 6 to 10 minutes and know if we were on track or not. So now the start of the race. So of course, in typical fashion, I went out too fast and I ran the first 3 loops all the way. Even in a 24-hour race, I can't control myself. But the good news is that going out too fast in this instance was still about an 11-minute per mile average, which is significantly slower than, what's a good effort pace for me. So it wasn't like I was going crazy or anything. It only took about 3 laps until I got that all out of my system. Mark and Brandon had decided they were just going to walk for the entire first hour. It's a long race and there was no reason to go crazy at the beginning. Once I finished my 9th loop at the end of the first hour, I decided I needed to get on board with the strategy that Julie had told us that we needed to do, which was to run 1 lap and walk 1 lap and just do that as long as we could. She said, I don't know anything about ultras. I've just had this nagging thought in my brain that that's what I needed to tell you to do, and I think you should do it. And so I was like, you're right, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. And so after that first hour, we kind of just got into that rhythm of running a lap, walking a lap, 0.6 miles at a time. Neither of us was wearing a watch, so we just kind of settled into what was a comfortable pace, back to that ultra shuffle, just something where we knew our heart rates were low, we were able to chat, and we weren't really going to burn up our energy stores. When that happens, you end up hitting that wall and just everything kind of falls apart, which I had experienced just 6 days ago in the Marine Corps Marathon, and I definitely did not want to do that again. That easy pace had us finishing the run laps at around 6 minutes and 30 seconds, and the walk laps were around 9 minutes and 30 seconds for an overall average of 8 minutes per loop. That meant we were doing 7.5 loops per hour, which secretly kept us on that pace for the 100 miles. We never talked about that goal of 100 miles. That would be ridiculous and terrifying. So we just set a short-term goal. We said, let's run 10 miles and see how we feel at that point. Once we hit that milestone at about 2 hours and 10 minutes, we said, hey, that felt pretty good. Well, we run to 20 miles. So we did that, and that continued on through the day. We would just set small goals that keep us occupied and give us something we could achieve in the next couple hours. It really kept our minds off the fact that we still had 22 hours and then 20 hours and 18 hours still left to go before the race was over. We maintained this for about 2 hours. However, the combination of walking more than I was used to, walking at a faster pace than I was used to, and wearing some old shoes really started making things a little bit painful for me. So I decided at that point I was going to go back to the running a full lap and then only walking half a lap strategy so that I could run more, because that's what my body knew and that's what I was trained to do. I finally met back up with Mark, Brandon, and Julie. After a full hour of doing my full lap and then half lap walk, I only gained 1 extra lap. It seems stupid to have done all that extra work and not have it really benefit me all that much. So for lap 5 and 6, it was back to that trusty 1-to-1 ratio. And surprisingly, our lap times were almost exactly the same as they were for lap 2 and 3, which was really awesome. And we were still feeling really good. We hit the marathon point somewhere around 5.5 hours. We have been doing a great job of staying hydrated and eating plenty. Generally, we would grab stuff on our walk laps at the end of every hour. Sometimes at the half hour, if we were hungry or thirsty, we would just go into the all-you-can-eat buffet, aka aid station, and just grab whatever happened to look good. It was now around 1:30 p.m. and it was a beautiful, clear, sunny day. I made it a point to focus on hydration for the next couple hours, knowing that dehydration can just lead to muscle cramps. And this was definitely something that was on my quit list, aka something that would happen that would make me just stop. This was about the point when I told Mark that 100K seemed like an achievable goal, but I was going to make a triple marathon my stretch goal. That seemed like a logical progression after I had just done the double marathon back in the spring. But if we got to 78.6 miles and we still had time, we probably should just go for at least 80, right? We made a plan that we would take an extended break every 6 hours. This was essentially like a pit stop for a race car. Get in, get out as quick as possible, get as much done as we could. We'd stretch, foam roll, change the socks or shoes, rub our feet down with some lotion, eat a big snack and a drink, hit the bathroom if we needed to, reapplying anti-chafe just to avoid that completely. We felt like we were very efficient. After our break, Mark asked me if I thought we took like 5 or 6 minutes, and I didn't really know until we finished that lap, and it had taken 23 minutes for that lap. 10 minutes of walking the lap meant we took 13 minutes. We got a lot done, but that was a little bit longer than we had hoped to take. It amazed us how quickly time passed on a break. It was time well spent, but we hope to be a lot more efficient at the 12-hour and 18-hour breaks. At 7 hours, we crossed the 50K distance. This was a huge deal for me as I'd only ran this distance 3 times previously. However, I started having some minor problems here, just some general knee and ankle soreness, aches and pains. I decided that since I had 3 extra laps under my belt from the fast start early on, that I was just going to walk for an entire hour. I still ended up logging 6 laps that hour, which left me still in great shape, but I needed to make a slight adjustment to the plan. Mark had been ticking off laps like a machine, but I didn't feel like I could maintain the running a full lap and then speed walking another lap. So I switched to what I called my half and half strategy. We would run together for half a lap, and then Mark would continue running, and then I would walk the second half of the lap. And then Mark would switch to walking a lap, and then I would, again, run the first half of the lap, and then I would catch up to him, and then we would walk the last half of that lap together. So we kind of separated a little bit, but every 2 laps we were basically covering the same distance. This worked well for about an hour, but then things started going south again around hour 9. And so I just decided, you know what? I'm just going to walk for another entire hour. Focus on hydrating and fueling and just getting back to where I feel good. We still had a long time to go, and this is just kind of how I was going to battle through the lows. Just keep moving forward, no matter how slowly. Hour 10 brought up some much needed relief and a great pick-me-up. I'd been looking forward to this point all day when my wife Katie would be done with what she had going on, and her and the kids were going to come out and hang out with me on the race course for a little bit. The kids got really excited when I told them they'd be able to run a couple laps with me, and it was awesome when I saw them running out of the car cheering for me. And they tried to run with me for a little bit, but apparently after 10 hours of running, I was still running at a pace that was too fast for them. So I ran for a little bit, and then I would walk and let them catch up. And it was just fun to have them there. Then they would go hang out and play at the playground for a little bit while I went off and did the rest of the loop, and then I'd come around again, and they'd go run with me for about a quarter mile of the loop. Lots of I love yous, kisses, and hugs were exchanged in the time that they were there. That really got me back on track. My wife Katie is my biggest supporter, And just having her at the race telling me that I look great, that I can do this, whatever it ended up being, really made a world of a difference. After a while, Katie was ready to take the kids home, but they stuck around to see me hit 50 miles. No matter what, I was now going to achieve my main goal, which was a distance PR, as long as I could walk 3 miles in 12 hours. We hit 50 miles in 11 hours and 52 minutes. Somehow we were still on pace for 100 miles. However, in a lot of the research I did and with chatting with some runners throughout the day, I learned that to have a realistic shot at your first 100 miles, you really need to be at mile 50 in about somewhere between 10 and 11 hours. You just assume that things will go downhill at that point and you'll need a few more hours for the second 50. Shortly after hitting 50 miles, we took our second break. We did pretty much the exact same thing we did at the 6-hour break, but our minds and bodies must not have been functioning nearly as well. And this was all new territory for me. I'd never done a race that lasted longer than 12 hours. That break plus the lap ended up taking us 28 minutes, which meant 19 minutes of no movement. For the first time, our average pace was slower than the pace needed for 100 miles, which again was 14 minutes and 24 seconds per mile. The break was so long that our average overall pace actually dropped from 14:07 to 14:30 per mile. This had an interesting effect on me, though. I actually wasn't disappointed at all. It was almost kind of a relief, and I just said, oh, well, we're not on pace for 100 miles anymore. Now there's not any pressure. But Mark and I chatted, and we both still felt good enough to keep running, and so that's what we did. Back when I had been building out my race plan, I figured for the second half of the race, I would be running maybe half a lap and then walking a full lap. But Mark was still running the full lap like he had been doing for the entire race. And so I kind of changed my strategy again from the half and half strategy I was doing to where I was trying to run about 80% of the lap with a few shorter walk breaks during that. And Mark would continue, running his full lap. And then once I finished that first lap, I would just have to run a little bit to catch up to him and then we walked that second lap together, and we just continued on doing that. Surprisingly, in hour 12, we were doing the same pace we had been doing back in hour 2. We had the perfect plan, and we had been pacing ourselves perfectly without even wearing watches. And so we decided on our next goal. Let's just get from mile 50 to mile 62, which is 100K, and that's a huge accomplishment in the ultra world. I had never gone that far, and that was a huge milestone for me to hit. At this point, it was probably 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and things were getting dark, and we were injected with some new energy. We had a couple friends from the run club came out and joined us. Our friend Candace came out, and she has great energy. She ran some laps with us wearing a unicorn hat and just being a goofball. Kept us laughing, kept the mood light. Our friend Dave, who's probably the most encouraging runner that I know, wasn't able to run because he was dealing with an injury, but he still came out, and every time we came around for a lap, he told us how great we looked, and then when we were on our walk laps, he actually would walk with us. And then our friend Derek, who's a seasoned ultra runner, has done several 100-milers, came later on, and he ran some laps with us, and just always seemed to know the right thing to say to keep us motivated and keep us moving forward and feeling confident in what we were doing. When you feel like you must look terrible and everything seems like it's going to fall apart, but you have friends there that constantly tell you look great and you're doing great, you can actually convince yourself that you do feel great, and it doesn't make any sense, and I don't really know how that happened, but we definitely felt that. Julie earned the title of Best Support Crew Person of all time all throughout the day. Every time we came around on a lap, she was there waiting for us to tell her what we needed, whether it was mixing up some water in our electrolyte mix, if we wanted certain food, if we needed salt tabs, or even something simple like plugging my phone in to charge while I was out running the next lap. Whatever we needed, she always seemed to be right on top of it. While we were in good shape and didn't really need any help from her, she came out and walked and ran some laps with us on the course. She actually ran her most miles ever in a day, 35 officially on her watch, but we think it was more like 38 to 40 because she didn't record every single one. There is zero chance that we would have accomplished what we did on that day without all of her help. This is a time in the race when things really start getting confusing. All the pain that I had in my feet and hips and knees and muscles had just kind of gone away. I didn't have any stomach issues all day due to keeping the pace easy and slow and doing lots of walking. I had been able to eat and drink plenty all throughout the day. The temperature had dropped quite a bit, probably down into about the low 40s. I've been wearing a tank top all day. I ended up putting on a long sleeve shirt, and then I wore a jacket mostly just to have the pockets to carry food or my phone or whatever else I needed. I put some compression sleeves on my legs, to keep those a little bit warm, but also for the added effects that compression can do. But I still have my shorts on. I think the cold weather actually really helped to keep us awake and alert. I never really once felt like I needed to sleep. I'm sure all the Coke that I was drinking helped a lot with that too, caffeine, and probably every couple laps I was getting a little drink of Coke. We said repeatedly that despite running the same 0.59 mile loop over 100 times, it never really felt repetitive. It just kind of got embedded in our brains that once we cross the start line, that's where we run, and then we run, until we get around the baseball fields, and then we walk for a little bit, and then when we get past the other fence post, that's when we start running again. And then we walk at the corner, and then we run once we get past the inflatables, and then we walk again until we get to the start line. And then we just repeat that over and over and over again. If this was any other race format and we just didn't have that consistency of hitting certain points and knowing when it was time to run and when it was time to walk, I guarantee we would not have had the success that we did. At the time when we should have been falling apart and becoming more inconsistent, we actually were becoming more consistent than we ever had been. And everything was just going perfectly. I had been pretty obsessively watching the live tracking results every time we finished a lap. Just before we hit the 100K mark, just before 15 hours, we finally got our average pace back down under that 14:24 per mile. And so I announced to everybody, we're back on pace for 100. We just continued ticking off laps in the dark. And before we knew it, we had hit our next short-term goal, 75 miles in 17 hours and 55 minutes. So we were 5 minutes ahead of 100-mile pace. And that's when things really started to get real. For the few hours leading up to that, we just kept wondering, when are things going to fall apart? We both said, it would be heartbreaking to get to 85 or 90 miles and then come up short of getting to the 100. That number had never been in our heads throughout the day because we didn't think it was possible. And we just, like I said, been setting those small goals. Well, you hit so many of those small goals, eventually you get to the point where you're like, I think we might actually be able to do this. We knew we had another break coming up in just a few minutes at hour 18, and we knew it had to be quick. Another 19-minute break like we had at hour 12 would probably have made reaching 100 miles almost impossible. We just wouldn't have had enough time left in our race to make up the lost time of sitting around during our break. We knew at this point we had a chance at 100 miles, and we wanted to keep that chance open as long as we possibly could. We had just a small cushion, but unfortunately that break ended up taking us 14 minutes, and so again we were in that position where we had to really push it to make up the time that we lost from sitting around for too long. It wasn't as big of a hole that we had to dig out of coming out of that 12-hour break. Plus, we also had that 5 minutes extra cushion. And actually, for the first time all race, we actually got back on track of being at the same distance. Like I said, in that first hour, I had logged a few extra laps that Mark didn't because they were walking and I was stupidly trying to run fast. But while I was taking a few extra minute break, Mark went and ran an extra loop with our friend Derek. So we were finally on track to finish with the same distance, whatever that ended up being. We wanted to make sure we finished our race together with the same result because we had been working together for the entire race. After that break, we had 40 laps left to go to get to 100 miles. And I debated counting down every lap, but that got to be too much and too mentally taxing and stressful. So I decided I would just do every 10 laps. So 40, 30, 20. It took us 17 laps to finally make up that time that we lost from our break. We were over 85 miles at that point. There was no chance we weren't going to leave everything out there and go for the 100 miles. After a while, it just became a fact that we were going to run 100 miles. There was nothing that was going to stop us. Every time we ran past runners or our race crew, they kept telling us we looked great and asked how many laps we had to go. And we would say 20 laps to go or 15 or 10, but that's still a long ways to go. We just knew that at any moment things could fall apart and our race would be done. We knew we had to be careful about every issue from here on out. One little issue could still make the whole thing fall apart. At this point, we also made an agreement that if one of us had to stop for a bathroom or for anything else, the other person had to continue going on at the planned pace, and it was up to the other person to catch back up. No sooner did we make this agreement than Mark had to stop and take a bathroom break, but he quickly caught back up. About 2 laps after that, I had to jump in the bathroom. Without getting into too much details, when you eat 10,000 calories of ultra food and pile on top of that 7 or 8 chocolate meal replacement shakes, the results are not always pleasant. This felt like the most stressful 4 minutes of my life. As I stared at my phone every second watching the minutes tick away, 3:25 a.m., 3:26, 3:27, 28, 29. I finally got out and knew I had a lot of work to do to catch up. but I was happy that Mark had continued on at pace. It took me about 5 laps of pushing really hard without a lot of my regular walk breaks before I finally caught back up to him. Thankfully, it was right as Mark was starting a walk lap, and I just walked that entire lap with him. Around 90 miles, we still had 2.5 hours to go. There finally weren't any more another 10 miles goals to make. It was just, let's get to 100 miles. We called that our sit-down goal. Once we get there, we can finally just sit down and relax. Finally, with about 10 laps to go, a little less than 6 miles, we pretty much knew we had it in the bag, and we thought we could probably walk the rest of the way in. We weren't going to take that risk because we didn't trust any running math at this point. We felt okay, and so we just continued to run. Mark did finally relent on running the entire lap and ended up joining me on our regular walk breaks. The running loops finally deviated from the usual 6 minutes and 20 seconds to 6 minutes and 30 seconds, not because of pain, fatigue, sleep deprivation, or necessity, but because we chose to, because we knew that our goal was in hand. We were counting down the loops for Julie so that she could get up and go take a video of us at the finish line. We witnessed another runner who almost quit at 90 miles have a resurgence, thanks to another runner who laced his shoes back up and got back out there after limping around for a while. They were sprinting around that last lap for Tate to finish up his 100 miles. This is a testament of just how awesome the ultra running community is. Even though George felt awful, he knew that Tate had this goal and he really wanted to achieve it. And so George went out and did everything that he could do to make sure he pushed him and encouraged him and got him across that finish line. They asked us to join, but we knew we had like 13 minutes to finish, so we ended up just walking the entire last lap, except for after we rounded the last turn. We heard several other runners finishing their 100 miles and getting cheers. We couldn't wait for our moment, so once we turned that last corner, we just ran it into the finish line to what felt like an enormous crowd celebrating and cheering for us. We shared hugs, tears, thanks, and just could not believe how perfectly the last 24 hours had. And we knew that there was no way we could have done what we did without each other. So post-race, this is a real feeling accomplishing something that I had thought about as a dream goal I might chase in a few years. I never seriously thought it was possible on this day. Even now, I can't begin to fathom how there was absolutely no downfall. I downloaded all the data I could from the timing company and did some further analysis to look at lap pace and average lap pace. Aside from my fast start in the first hour, the 3 long breaks at the 6, 12, and 18 hour marks, our average pace is nearly a straight line. It fluctuated between 14:20 per mile and 14:25 per mile for almost the entire last 12 hours. Our splits were also insanely close. Our first 50 miles took 11 hours, 52 minutes, and 28 seconds. Our second took 12 hours, 4 minutes, and 17 seconds. But if you subtract the extended breaks we had, the moving time for the first 50 was 11 hours and 39 minutes. And for the second 50, it was 11 hours and 31 minutes. In a sense, a negative split. How is that even possible? So what went wrong? Honestly, only a few things. For the first 6 hours, I wore some shoes that were too old, and my feet let me know pretty quickly. I had some pains and the beginnings of a blister on the side of the ball of my right foot. During our break, I quickly stuck it with a safety pin for my bib to let it drain, reapplied some lotion, and I got a new pair of socks. I also switched to a newer pair of Hoka Cliftons, which felt like stepping on pillows, and that problem was quickly resolved. I had some lows during the 7th and 9th hours, but I just embraced them, knowing that there will always be highs and lows in an event this long. I didn't let it affect me mentally. I just knew that I would take things easy until I felt better, and I think not really having a set goal going into the race helped a lot. I knew just continuing to move forward, even walking for an hour straight, would be fine with me, whatever the result. The only other thing was the bathroom break, and 4 minutes out of 1,440 minutes wasn't ever going to make or break my race, despite how I might have been feeling during that moment. In the days after the race, I didn't really have any more pain than typical post-race soreness. I did have some swelling in my left ankle, no idea why though, but some post-race compression and icing, that went away after about a day. My leg muscles got pretty tight 2 days post-race, so I focused on stretching and hydrating, and they felt good a few days after that. Because of careful preparation and monitoring and maintenance throughout the race, I had no chafing issues and no blisters, which is crazy. The shoes I wore were perfect. I didn't have any toenail problems. I did get a slight sunburn just from being exposed to the sun all day, but nothing too bad. So there was definitely a question of where do I go from here? And there are obviously several other 100-mile races that are quite different than this race. 100-mile races in the mountains, or there's more timed races on a track, and even shorter loop. There are also multi-day journey runs such as the last annual Vol State which is 500K, and you have like 10 days to do that. So I may attempt to run like that at some point, but not anytime soon. My plan for the rest of the year after the race was just to, maintain whatever amount of mileage I needed to hit that 2,000 miles for the year, which wasn't much. And then for 2019, I was really going to focus on some harder trail races. So what lessons did I learn from this race? Number one, don't dwell on your failures. They don't define you as a runner. I've seen my fair share of failures in the past, especially in 2018 with failures at the Barkley Fall Classic, where I missed a cutoff for the 50K finish by over 2 hours. I also had what I considered an epic failure at the Marine Corps Marathon just 6 days before this event. We all have those days in training that seem like failures because we don't hit a distance or a speed or whatever arbitrary goal we have set for that run. Sometimes it's just not your day, and that's perfectly fine. I've learned to put my ego aside, accept that there will be bad runs and races, and I move on to the next one. That mentality helped me remain confident in what I was doing all day, and that led to one of my greatest successes as a runner. Number two, do some research and learn what you can from others, but ultimately find what works for you and stick to it. I read all I could and tried some different things throughout training and this race. Some things worked, some didn't. I went into the race fully prepared for many situations with all the different clothing and food options. However, I wasn't running into any problems with the outfit and gear I was using, so I ended up just wearing the same outfit all day, aside from adding that layer when it got cold later on at night. I found some food that I could consistently eat, so I stuck to eating that every couple hours. There's a turkey cheese roll-up and corn chips with Gatorade and Coke. That's what I could stomach, and so that's what I was going to keep eating and drinking just to keep fueling myself all throughout the day. Same could be said for our pacing. I had some different variations on my run walk strategies, but it still ended up finishing 2 laps in the same time that Mark did, right on the overall average pace for the 100 miles. The 1-to-1 ratio was working for Mark, but I had to figure out what worked for me, and we were both able to find our way to a successful 24 hours. Number 3, break an ultra into smaller, more manageable pieces. I think this was one of the biggest components to our success. We had a few times where we wondered how far we could really go as the day went on, and we continued to feel great. But for the most part, it was 10 miles at a time, and we weren't really even tracking that distance since we weren't wearing watches. Our race was really approached as 1 lap at a time, thanks to Julie's genius plan. This idea can also be applied to any other race or distance races if you're able to mentally block out the end goal. Running to the next big climb on a mountain trail or running to the next aid station or mile marker on a road race could be smaller goals that lead to multiple successes throughout the race. Number 4, I'm just going to shout out this race. The Cape Fear 24-hour endurance run in Lillington, North Carolina is a must-do race. This was my first experience with a timed race and a looped race. It never got boring as there were over 60 runners spread out on the short loop. We were constantly interacting with all different people, even through the night as several runners stopped running, but either walked the rest of the course and cheered us on or stayed in their chairs or at the aid station to encourage those of us that were still going. The aid station was an all-you-can-eat buffet and held true to the phrase that ultra running is just an eating contest. Different food I ate included pizza, cheeseburgers, hot dogs, grilled chicken tenders, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, turkey cheese and ham and cheese roll-ups, trail mix, pretzels, corn chips, Cheez-Its, bananas, oranges, candy bars, Rice Krispie treats, muffins, and Danishes. And I'm sure there was some bacon in there too. There were several other things that I didn't eat, quesadillas, a bunch of different soups. This race offers maximum support and is the perfect opportunity to challenge yourself to go run a distance that you never thought possible. Number 5 is a huge thing in the ultra community, and it's making sure that you give back. One of the biggest thoughts in my head about what's next was that I need to give back. I need to be the one in the support role for somebody else. Now that I have this experience, I'd love to be the one to help somebody else the way that Julie helped me and Mark. Maybe the next time I can get some friends to sign up to run the race and I can do that for them. We already told Julie that she was going to run it the next year and get 50 miles. And if she did, that we would be up all night supporting her with whatever she needed to make sure that she hit her goal. Spoiler alert, she ran 100K. Lastly, number 6, find a friend and tackle a challenge together. This is really a cornerstone of what our run club has been. We run together, but we're also just as much a social club as we are a run club. I put out the call for help to get this done, and friends and family both responded. Without all the encouraging messages from people all over the country, I easily could have gone to a dark place mentally and quit early. Without the help from Julie and camp, we would have spent several extra minutes getting our own things around and we would have ran out of time. Without having Mark and Brandon there running with me the whole time, going through the same challenges and feelings as I was, I would have ran slower and walked slower, ran less and walked more as the night went on, and possibly would have stopped before the 24 hours was up. We accomplished what we did because we had each other's back the entire way. So I hope you enjoyed my race recap. I know it's from a race that was 5 years ago, but I originally wrote this as a big long blog post, and I really wanted to get it in video form and throw some of my pictures together and share this information out on YouTube. So hopefully if someone's trying to run their first 100 miles or they're doing a timed 24-hour race, maybe they can get some tips and tricks on things that work for me. But like I said, ultimately you have to find what works for you. So hopefully if that's your goal, you accomplish that, and good luck, and we'll see you on the next video.